Beauty, art, it's in the eye of the beholder. What do we teach? Techniques? Thought processes? Observations? Not necessarily to make imitations, but to inspire oneself from the thought process and bring in what we have to say creatively ourselves through the work of somebody else to the extent of interpretation, or to create something which is meaningful, not just for the sake of it through this or that technique of language, but to have the opportunity to touch fellow humans here, now, and beyond time, compared to performers, though with recordings they do touch after themselves too, the next generations. But there is something about the immediacy of the exchange between performers and audience. And of course, if the audience is scholar, then nevertheless they compare with their awareness, knowledge, and criteria. And if they're not, they just absorb the storytelling the way it's told and the charisma. But they wouldn't have a criteria to know if it's exaggerated or not, if it's purely the text or not, or if the text needs to be enhanced in a certain way to be focalized to a point of view. Subjectivity, objectivity, it's like beauty in art, or the meaning of beauty in art that is to be defined aesthetically by the fact that we cannot explain it. We can analyze the processes which can highlight some guidelines about structure or thought process or development of a structural thought, or any kind of emotional, intellectual combination of the human being aware of its own finality, which is death since birth. And this awareness creates a sense of immediacy to be shared, either because the traumatic events need to be retold through other means, an art form of gestures like dance, or of forms and shapes like sculpture, architecture. And all of these, painting, abstract or figurative, music tonal or atonal, with or without lyrics, it is really important to translate from one form to another, or through even another, the essence of our awareness of being, through faith, through hope, through will, through the desire to share with others something ironic, funny, subtle, happy, sad, combining all of these in different levels of subtle innuendos of human psyche that can perspire through the elements that are depicted in visual, sound, or other ways of, like, taste buds, forms of art forms where we produce something to touch our senses. And beyond that, our philosophical meaning of it. We don't think of it in such terms every day because likely it would be too heavy to carry the burden intellectually. But through all our actions of trust, of hope, of respond with expectation and be worried if one doesn't reach the expectation of a student, of a child, of a friend, and ultimately of ourselves. That's why I think that in absence of objectivity for beauty, art, and how we define it or how we describe it, after all, the art forms exist because they express what they do on their own terms. Any translation of a poetry or of a fiction will be meaning, but not necessarily the innuendos of the sound of the words chosen. Therefore, yes, we need to learn the language of each author, but that is an impossible task in our time, given to be alive. And because on top of it we reject easily when we don't adopt, it becomes difficult to be judgmental with the criteria that is only your own. And it's nothing wrong with having opinions, because that's what makes us exist in our rapport to universe. And I find that the meaning of beauty must be somewhere between the meaning of truth and the meaning of agreeable being. Art is disturbing, is provoking, is thought-provoking. It's sometimes nauseating because it reflects human nature or behaviors that are appalling, regardless of the moralism or not. It's nothing about moralism here. It's about, do we face with an honest mirror our own destiny and our own actions, despite of our own attractions or distractions or desire to adhere to this or reject that and become followers of this, or become betraying the ones we followed, because we evolve and we change according to our level of understanding. Were we manipulated? Did we understand? Did we misunderstand? Is art this or is art that? In fact, a lot is given at birth. The innate and the acquired. And the acquired is education. Education is the self-critical availability to our human nature, coming from having read so much of what our predecessor thought about all these subjects, and make our own opinion, if ever we can separate this from the daily survival of life. We have to be fed, we have to bring solace and courage and energy to those who depend on us for it, and as well as take time to enter in reflections about the purpose of it all. And if it's escaping those who don't have faith, then they find other ways to justify it. And art forms can be rejected, they can be old-fashioned, they can be connotated to time periods which then are mocked, like sports in the past appeared to be a great achievement. Today the records of the past seem childish, but in their own time they were essential breakthroughs. All music was modern at some point. All languages existed as not only a language to exchange thoughts and transmit knowledge or receive as terms of endearments or commands, but also to organize thinking process about the purpose of what we are doing and how others are doing it, and to have an educated capacity to understand if we are manipulated by people who tell us what to think about an art, like in any other ways of life, and how we think about it by ourselves. Or we're afraid because we don't know, we don't have enough criteria, we're not specialists in this, we're not specialists in that, in science, in anything. And if we are, then it's a niche knowledge. And how does that translate in the global culture, in the sense of the shared experience of humanity, with all its diverse intellectual culture and beliefs and languages? Yes, on the basis we are all humans, but in the culture of the way we are brought up, where we are brought up, when we are brought up, we follow certain trends, blindly or willingly, or we refuse some of them. But it takes so much intellectual and physical power to swim against the tide. And it's not because the majority says that this painting represents this that you have to agree, even if it doesn't mean that to you. And perhaps it doesn't mean anything. So art historians explain to you what it should mean because of this and that. Musicologists explain to you through publishers how you're supposed to recite the score, trust them for the right text that is supposed to be the composer's intent. And composers themselves tend to be sometimes very picky about playing me my music, and interpretation is betrayal, but interpretation is also a translation from an instrument to a time period, from a culture to another. We have the beauty of choosing intellectually matters in which we develop curiosity that makes us develop knowledge if we have the opportunity, the financial resources to study Egyptology or not being Egyptian and so on. Therefore, yes, there is a universal feeling that art addresses all humans. Is it dance in music? Is it the voice as the first examples of human expressing their being on earth? Is it tapping on the floor? Is it using their voice to prolong a pitch, a scream, a whisper, a term of endearment, a war scream, an aria from an opera or an art song, setting poems in music, which is already combining arts that are not necessarily needing one because the words have their own music. They don't need music on top of it. But sometimes the music tune helps us remember the tune or even the words, even if it's a mnemotechnic gesture of memorizing the lines or texts. So there is something to do with the human voice connecting to the music of the words, the music of the meaning, or the non-meaning. Since we don't know languages, then we listen to them as sounds, and we know the languages, then we listen to them as meaning, and less than with sounds. And if the sounds are familiar in their organization, tonal, modal, or some, and if they're apparently mysterious because you don't connect to them unless you learn the language of some post-tonal composer, then inevitably you find it random or unconnectable unless you're duly induced into this art language to appreciate it. And then the rejection is very easy. If you don't know the music that you're hearing, you try to connect it to music styles you recognize in pop, in classic, in film, in video game, whatever it is, it's always references to something that we know. But if you don't have references, then what do? You connect it to the way it's performed, the way it's sung, the way it's played. And you say, I prefer this player for Chopin, but you don't know how much you like the Chopin itself because perhaps you don't have access to it by yourself, like to Shakespeare or to Van Gogh. And it's not just on the surface, the colors or the pitches or the test buds for cuisine. What is dissonant to one culture is consonant to another, or through evolution of time reached a certain way of dealing with it, with funeral or birth, with wedding or birthday, with celebration of sunset or sunrise, with solstices. And this voyage of life is short enough and at the same time long enough to reflect sometimes about why and when and where, and therefore we identify some things beautiful like a sunset or a face. Is it only hormonal, neuronal, at nucleus levels? Is it acquired taste because of necessity to bond? Is it because some naturally are leaders in fields and others are followers, and doesn't make the in art form the ones less than the others? Because after all, art form is to rethink the status quo. If not, you'll just reproduce it. And it's nothing wrong with reproducing it because you'll never reproduce it exactly. So when people say, hi, you're already continuing to develop what was expressed in the 19th century, how do you know? There were so many people in the 19th, 18th, 18th, any of the centuries who history has forgotten because of the fact that it chose a few to remember through their work more than their being, or sometimes a bit of both, but generally the others are forgotten. Does it mean they're all unfairly forgotten? Possibly, but we don't know because we don't have time to explore all. And if we do, then we start discovering things that are meaningful to us that we try to connect others to believe so because we are becoming convinced. Convinced is convincing, and convincing is, the conviction is powerful. Beyond playing beautiful in the piano world, you have to play meaningful. To serve the art meaningfully is somewhere between the truth and the beauty and the agreeable feel to be in it, to be in this time capsule, to be in this timeless moment, shared with others or in your own thoughts, or both. Music not only illustrative of prayers or storytellings, opera, film, games, series, but music is a language of its own, without lyrics, that talks to us intuitively differently. And among the knowledgeable people who are the music knowledgeable people, they define what we're supposed to appreciate and how we're supposed to classify it into this style, this genre, this time period, and how we're supposed to play it, think it, hear it, expect it, and what is right, what is wrong. To a certain extent, it's guidelines. To a certain extent, it becomes mental prisons, because after all, you can very well enjoy a painting without an art historian explaining to you the innuendos in it. It doesn't mean that because you're educated that you appreciate it less. And it doesn't mean that you appreciate it more purely because you don't know anything about it. It's true. You can explain a harmonic progression like you can explain a grammar form of expression, and you can say this is why by placing the verb there or this tense there, the article in that place, you obtain this effect of rhetoric, um, touching at different levels our psyche. And this music is the same thing, except that when you make it up yourself, you tell something through your music, a gesture of an interval, a gesture of the harmony that codes psychologically the expression, or without it, just layered voices in polyphony or in dialogue or in contradiction. Dance or song, reflective or all of the above. I find that the essential is to remain very humble in front of the fact that no matter how much we develop by knowledge through curiosity and education, a niche awareness of something essential that is not part of the global culture, but it's contributive to it. So you have this plethora of specialists of things that you might be at best curious or at worst not even caring about. Saying, I don't have time with all that. I have to deal with what I have to deal. After all, there's only so many hours a day, and I am responsible to carve well, work well, produce well, reproduce this, teach that, organize this. In other words, serve as a service to this, to organize that. We all contribute to the smooth motion of societal existence. And then we start to learn about history and to learn about how we project ourselves in the future. But the past and the future are only different forms of present, just like music was modern even when Baroque to us. And music of the avant-garde of the 20th century, it's already old-fashioned in the 21st. So in the ever-evolving technology or awareness, perhaps to do with our psyche adapting to that, short time to be focused on one topic because we want to touch upon so many, since we can travel faster and access more, and if we have the time and the hunger and the intellect to learn, we become scholars of something in lesser time than it took centuries in the past not to even be aware of it because of the lack of access to their own past, or misunderstanding scientific past of how things are organized, Big Bang or not, atoms or not, and how, and all. I think it's fascinating because time goes by fast and we try to make ourselves exist in a value system where we evaluate that this art form is more meaningful. Within the art form, this repertoire is more meaningful. Within this repertoire, these creators are more meaningful because, and we find always good reasons, either pedagogical, either artistic, to say that, after all, that is why universal knowledge is not reachable for a single person, even if today the tools to reach are more easy. But the putting together all the dots remains a lifelong effort of educated people in humility, not to know, but to grasp, or perhaps to. Not everybody needs to open their Christmas gift if they received it to see how it's built. It's not necessary to know how a Bach fugue functions in order to experience it as a listener or as a performer. But the curiosity is a very necessary drive that brings you then to establish this value system of what we determine is beautiful, meaningful, essential, miscellaneous, secondary, less important, not time for that. And you realize with time passing that what today in some developed, cultivated societies, the authors who were mattering in the past matter less today. Why? Is it trends? Is it cyclic? Will it come back? Perhaps it will. Perhaps it won't. Perhaps human beings are futile because they are not capable of long concentration for reflection. An art form takes so much technique to be produced that you can lose the purpose of it while trying to achieve the technique to express it. And so by the time you do, if you do you know what you want to express? So you are told that by a teacher, a guru, star who you try to imitate because the way they play your piece, that you practice your piece. The piece that somebody wrote for you to feel like it was for you, which is a wonderful feeling of appropriation. But nevertheless, the technique to reach it should not stop the purpose of searching of the meaning of this art form and how we want to make the narrative storytelling meaningful. On the piano by yourself, you're like a conductor in an orchestra and a composer and a music theorist all in one. It's like an opera on your own. And the composers who write for piano are either pianists, either not pianists, either thinking through their hands, their fingers, their technique, their abilities, or they are conceptually thinking for the piano as an orchestra, a quartet, an aria, an opera. Regardless which way, you enter in the musical thought of a composer when you play the composer beyond the notes. I'm deeply convinced that you cannot explain why a piece is beautiful. You can find some structural elements to define aspects of it. But the why touches your soul and your heart, and even attempt to put words into what words are not meant for, since it's its own art form. The best translation is not to need a translation. It's to be in the language beyond the universal meaning. There are choices that reflect the culture of the language. Music is a language, therefore there is a sense of truth. Objectively not, but subjectively yes. And a sense of beauty that comes from what we value in it and how we want to serve it with the technique we're trying to acquire, not to mess it up. Down to earth, while uplifted to the stars, to the beyond us, to the bigger than us, to the timeless than us. It's humbling and thrilling to be involved with art forms in the transmission of it with students, differently than with an audience, because you realize that no matter how many ways you have looked at the different aspects of the vista that you have of the artwork, a student comes and brings you something from the piece that you've never thought of, heard of, and you're still amazed by that fact. Perhaps it's grace. Perhaps it's just a soulful connection with few markings on a score that come alive through one person differently than through another in music. And it can move you or leave you without feelings. In other cases, it can enthuse you. And between the innate and the acquired, you develop a sense of subtle awareness and perhaps discover as life goes on that what you thought you rejected earlier aesthetically, you start understanding why it's meaningful to others, and you start perhaps becoming, by your own evolution in time, not only by a diktat from somewhere or because some fashion imposed it, that you say, oh, this is what post-tonal music is to me, not only by itself, and why I didn't understand it or why I embraced it, or minimalist music or any other form of language to be a vehicle for something meaningful to say that becomes beautiful for those for whom this meaning touches their souls and hearts. That's at least my thought. Thank you for having listened to my thoughts.